Okay, hello everyone. We are live. This is Nikolai, Postgres TV, and together today I have Michael from PG Mustard. Hi, Michael.
Hello.
And our guest is Alvaro from Ongres. Thank you for joining.
Sure, pleasure. Thank you for bringing me.
And we are going to have some brief discussion, small discussion about licenses in Postgres ecosystem. And I think it's a good combination of three of us because we have somewhat different views on the problem, as I know. And we actually made different choices, almost different. For example, Michael's product, PG Mustard, it's fully online and it's not open source at all, like fully proprietary SaaS. Software as a service, right? Alvaro, you have Postgres, which is on AGPL, which is like quite very powerful package of Postgres on Kubernetes with many blocks, building blocks like backups, monitoring, and so on. Correct me if I'm wrong, of course, right?
And so far, you're right.
Right. Good. And I'm building a database lab engine, DB Lab, which is right now is also on AGPL, which is for thin cloning, database branching for any Postgres. It is also on AGPL, but I'm about to switch to Apache probably. So I'm going to use our discussion today to either support this decision or maybe change my mind, because I'm decided like 90%, but we have some chances to convince me to not to do it. But in general, I think it's very good time we live in, because obviously clouds everywhere, and clouds influenced open source software makers' decisions, right? And we have cases like with Mongo and Elastic, some interesting cases in Postgres ecosystem as well. But also some people already start to move away from clouds. We have also interesting cases. And like, where do you want to start discussing this?
You pick. I'm ready.
Okay.
I'd be really interested to hear why did you originally choose AGPL and why are you considering changing that? That feels really interesting.
I agree.
So yeah, okay. I was influenced by Alvaro actually, and yes. And the problem, like we have permissive licenses, and Postgres itself is on very permissive license. It's of their own license, but it's very close to BSD. BSD, MIT, Apache, they all say you can incorporate your software into your proprietary software or your GPL software or anything. That just don't forget to mention original creators and so on, like some small requirements, right? Apache license is also like that. But also we have like copyleft licenses, and the AGPL is one of them. It requires you to remain in open source. If you derive something from it, you must keep it open source. And of course, like I still don't fully understand. I'm not a lawyer, but of course, but I don't understand fully if AGPL license protects you from some SaaS maker or cloud vendor taking your software and without you building good business on top of it, right? But I was told not once that it's so pity that you chose AGPL because we could use it very easily. I heard it from platform builders, right? Who are building platforms like SaaS, platform as a service, on top of Postgres, and they said it's pity because we don't work with AGPL. Of course, it's so, and around AGPL there is some mystery, which I guess started at Google, right?
Yes.
So since Alvaro influenced me, I pass my word to Alvaro. Please explain why you chose AGPL, and this led to my choice as well.
Okay. So let me start from the basics, because actually I see there's a lot of confusion, and I'm not a lawyer either, and I'm definitely also not a licensing expert. So I still have strong opinions, yet I'm ready to be challenged or corrected if I'm mistaken. But let's start from the beginning. but for me, the most important thing, and what people most often overlook, surprisingly, it's what is the very definition of open source, right? And the definition of open source is a set of licenses or a license that complies with the key 4 freedoms of open source, all right, of the free software. And they are very clearly stated. You can Google them, or you can add the links later to the show, but basically they're 4 clear freedoms. And every open source license has to comply with them. Otherwise, it's not open source. These freedoms are very wide. Essentially, you can do with free software anything that you want, practically speaking, right? You can definitely run it as you want. You can definitely have the right to study the source code, modify it. And so there is a lot of freedoms already provided as warranties from any open source license, whether permissive or copyleft. So this is the most important thing that a lot of people often confuse. So actually, there's certainly some anti-copyleft, anti-GPL, and especially anti-AGPL version 3 concerns. And most often they start with the fact that these are not free license, they impose restrictions on you. And that is essentially wrong, because that goes against the very definition of these 4 freedoms of open source. They wouldn't be open source if they would impose you restrictions. So what copyleft licenses actually do provide you is what I call forward carrying warranties. So this is a philosophical topic, and let me go straightly direct to it. The main difference between copyleft and permissive license is how you interpret freedom. Some people say freedom is you can do anything you want, including removing this freedom from the software, and this is a permissive license. Some other people say, no, for me, freedom is that something that is free will remain free. And this is copyleft licenses, to put it very simple. So copyleft licenses try to ensure that they will survive as open source, whereas permissive license allow proprietary forks, for example. So one of the main reasons, if not the main, for me, definitely, to pick AGPL for Postgres is that we want to guarantee that this software will always remain open source, that there will be no proprietary forks of it, and that whomever wants to fork it to improve it, it will be also, because of the license available, these changes, modifications, improvements to this derived version of Postgres will be available to the users of those derived versions. And Postgres, the project itself, could benefit from them because it's also open source under the same license. You can go and pick those changes and import them, even if they're not upstream directly, which is also the expectation. So in summary, for me, the decision to use a copyleft license is to ensure a path of open source continuity on the project. It will never be forked in a proprietary fashion. And second, that whomever improves it in some way, it will be eventually, potentially, fed back into the upstream project, which is Postgres itself. This is the main reason. Someone would say, oh, you can choose AGPL, and some people do, to prevent big cloud vendors from cannibalizing your project. And I believe this is a wrong approach. I would love big cloud vendors to cannibalize Postgres. That would mean a fantastic market validation of the software and probably contributions back to the project. So I'm really waiting. Big cloud vendors, please go ahead. And if you really trying to prevent cloud vendors anyway to take your work, maybe you're not thinking properly about open source. That's my strong take.
But what happened at Google? Because Google has very bold statement that AGPL is forbidden. Like you cannot use inside. If you're a Google engineer, you cannot use AGPL. It's like,
I think they're wrong.
But what happened? Can you explain? Because I think this influenced a lot of other companies. Yes. And I saw it as well. Like they say, oh, we also want to stay away of AGPL products.
It's funny because they actually mention GPL itself. And there's a lot of GPL code that they use regardless. I mean, MySQL, Linux, Java.
GPL, right? Not AGPL, but GPL, right?
Yeah, they're GPL, yeah. And there's great software AGPL also. So I think that is a decision that was driven long time ago by some context that was probably different as of today. But second, probably driven by lawyers. Lawyers, especially in big corporations, they try at all costs to avoid potential problems as unlikely as they are. And in reality, you can call it a risk from a business perspective if you want, that if you take some non-permissive, like copyleft license source code and augment it and integrate into your systems and then become available to users, because if you keep it private, that's one of the freedoms of open source. But if you go then and distribute to the users this modified version, which is also integrated with your code, as per the license, the whole thing needs to be open source, and they want to avoid this risk at all costs. So Google's decisions are maybe right, I even don't think so for them, may not be right for you. So I would encourage anyone that is following this Google decision to rethink by the stems, for the very same reason that the technical decisions that Google may use to run their environment may not be the same to run yours.
Yeah, I would like to definitely clarify this. I liked sharing screens, and this is it, right? So it's still there, documentation, reference using AGPL policy. So it's like very obvious document, right? And they talk about virality of the license, but they say absolutely no, you must not use it, and primary risk is virality of AGPL license. But GPL, which is used by, as you mentioned, MySQL and Linux as well, it's also the same, right? So this I don't understand, like you probably, right? So it means like this is something very strange. You ban AGPL, but you don't ban, and you cannot ban GPL because Linux is on it. And GPL is also has the same characteristic. If you derive something from it, you cannot change to Apache or MIT, right? So this is strange, and you also don't understand why it happened, right? So like decision is partial, obviously. If you ban AGPL, you should ban GPL as well. But since Google is big, many people said, okay, we will follow the same rule.
Yeah.
Do you think it's to do? Sorry to interrupt. I wondered if you thought it might be to do with the difference between the definitions of what you ship as your product versus what you have server side. So my understanding was that GPL, it's quite well specified that it's only what you ship as your product. So it's only things that you distribute, maybe front end, maybe kind of if you're a vendor of services, maybe a back end as well, but not necessarily what you have on developers' machines and all sorts of other things that you might consider to be background things. So, but whereas AGPL specifies that anything you're using to provide the software, if it's AGPL. So I think possibly it's a misunderstanding of that or an interpretation of that, but that feels to me like the big difference. It's like the server side thing versus what you distribute to your customers.
I think you're quite spot on with the first part of your statement. Technically, from the licenses, this is called derived software, right?
Nice.
So one of the freedoms of open source is that you can create derivative versions and use it for your own purpose, and that's it. End of story. AGPL in a wholly proprietary environment, you can use perfectly, no question. End of story, right? Some people say this is not possible, but this is not what the license says. You can take AGPL code and put it inside of your wholly proprietary infrastructure, and you're good to go. That's it. End of story. It's free software. You can use it for any purpose you want. This is one of the freedoms of open source. Different story is when you create a derivative version and you distribute this derivative version to users, to end users. All right. This is the key differentiating factor. This is probably what you're referring to. Now, AGPL, and again, people say Google called this viral clauses. I disagree also with that term. Some people say they impose restrictions. I also disagree with that term. I prefer to use this forward carrying warranties, that it will remain open source. So what AGPL says is essentially, if you're distributing a modified, or actually unmodified, but if you're not modifying, just take the source code of the original and just publish it and you're done, right? But if you're distributing a modified version of an AGPL product, offering it to end users, and those end users connect over the network, these forward carrying warranties apply them also to these users, which means they need to have access to your source code of the modified version of the software itself, not anything around it. People say, no, you need to open source your whole infrastructure code. No, that's not what the license says. The license talks about the derivative product. So let's pick the example with Postgres. Let's say you want to use a derived version of Postgres to provide a Postgres as a service. You can perfectly do this. But because you're exposing directly this software to the end users, they have the right to either the source code of Postgres if you didn't modify it, which is pretty simple, just point to the repository where we're hosting it, or if you modified it, to also benefit these users, and users have the right to your improvements to Postgres. This is actually what we want to accomplish. That if someone else can say, I love Postgres, we're gonna build on top of it a Postgres as a service, and they improve it, we want also to get those contributions back to benefit the whole Postgres community.
So on one hand, AGPL is not like, it doesn't have big differences with GPL, and it doesn't protect from SaaS to be built on this software, right? It doesn't protect at all. On the other hand, because of Google, it has some strange reputation.
True.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, and this is a strange situation. I think it started more than 10 years ago. I think this Google thing happened more than 10 years ago. And let me share a couple of more data points. So this is a chart from quite old from GitHub, and we see how MIT started to grow significantly here. Apache was quite small relatively, but AGPL, it's this tiny line, red line here. This is AGPL, and regular GPL is here. Well, it's quite big, right, because of Linux and others and so on. And this is a little bit newer data, a couple of years ago. We see here that both Apache and MIT on GitHub, they are more than 50% of all open source software licenses, and AGPL is quite small here. So, and this is like reality we live in. Permissive licenses are winning. So I have two questions here. First, do you see that there are some chances for GPL or AGPL to return and have some revenge in open source? And second, since AGPL doesn't protect from cloud vendor eating open source and so on, this is like a metaphor we know all. We see people do some different dances, right? They have like open core Apache for core product, for example, or MIT, and additional custom license for everything else, like non-open source probably, and so on. So two questions here: chances for GPL to return, and what's happening with open source who tries to have business as well. Right, especially for Postgres project, we see many examples. What do you think?
I mean, for the first one, I would say this is not kind of a, I mean, I know you're kind of joking, but I don't think there's a revenge. I don't think there's a competition. It doesn't matter the amount of percentage of licenses chosen by different projects. Actually, it's more about the quality of the projects and the adequateness, if that's an English word, so I'm not native speaker, of the license to the project itself. I love all open source licenses, and different products deserve different licenses, right? So I don't think there's any war on any advantages or disadvantages. Now, what I see is that this anti-GPL, anti-AGPL sentiment is starting to diminish. This is my sense. I don't have factual data. But I believe this is the case.
Right, because it doesn't make sense. Because if you ban it, you should ban GPL and stop using Linux as well. This is our, like, I agree here with you. Like, maybe I'm missing something here, but I think about it, and logically, this is right. If you ban AGPL, you should ban GPL. Maybe people who watch this can correct us and write a comment about it, because like what are we missing here? Looks like nothing, right? So this is a strange decision, but it's still there. I showed you.
There is, and actually we have also had Postgres users asking for this. But to me, if it kind of raises a red flag, right? When someone is asking, put Apache to your project and remove this AGPL license, that sounds to me like, hey, I want to make a proprietary fork of it. And please
Not
facilitate my job.
necessarily. Not necessarily. Probably they just think they also are missing something, and they just are afraid of making mistakes because this giant company made such decision. Probably they are smart and so on. We should do the same, right?
Yeah, but again, if you
Not
go to
necessarily fork. They probably just want. They have fears. Maybe that's it.
Yeah, but those fears are not properly analyzed because, again, if you go to the very definition of open source licenses, if you're just going to use it internally, you can do anything you want.
Most people are shallow. Right? Like I'm very shallow sometimes. Also, not analyzing.
Let me use an example here. I don't know if this is appropriate or not, but I don't know if you've seen that there was a case, and probably there's many, some weeks ago or months ago, where some individual had his daughter sick with a lot of like pimples. And he took a picture of these pimples to send to the doctor, and took the pictures of his daughter naked because all over the body, send them to the doctor. The doctor asked like this, and he just did it and sent it. And like 1 week after, his account at Google was banned, and he tried to recover it, and it was impossible. And months later, literally a month later, when he lost everything that was stored there, all the pictures of the last 10 years, whatever, and all the accounts and bank accounts, and recover everything, because without email, you need to change your life. He received a letter from the police, says that he was reported on potential child pornography, and that they investigated his whole life, and they concluded that it wasn't. It's all fun. It's all good, and you're good to return to your life. Sorry about this investigation, but we had to because we had a report, and it was legitimate claim. So he came back to Google and said, hey, okay, I now understand everything. You didn't tell me anything before, but here's the letter. Please, I get it. Oh, please give my account data back. They say no. My understanding is that they are so wary of making a mistake with legal issues that the smallest doubt about something will trigger very aggressive decisions. And I believe, even though it's probably not a good parallel, this may be applying to GPL, AGPL, or more precisely AGPL here. Any potential small doubt, they prefer just to avoid legal costs at any cost. So I think that this sentiment is starting to fade away, because actually there's pretty good software out there that is GPL or especially AGPL, and you don't want to avoid it, right? I would be very biased if I would say Postgres is on that list, but let me use another example for the Postgres community, Citus. This is such a fantastic software for sharding, and it's AGPL. You don't want to use it? Yeah, your choice.
I interviewed Hydra founders, and they took some Hydra, right? And it's like a Snowflake, open source Snowflake built on top of Postgres, and they took some code from there, obviously, and this part is AGPL. But as I remember, they try to keep other parts on Apache, so it makes things complex. So you think it's fading, right? Okay, this is good. This is good, but. Okay, maybe it will be, but while it's still there, I mean, this ban at Google, and people think eliminating risks and so on, it can be a roadblock for adoption of your product, right?
Yeah, it may be. But for us, it's more important to warranty our community of users that Postgres will remain open source, and that any forks will be potentially contributing forks. For me, the key or the difference is that when you have a permissive license, your forks may be non-contributing. If they're proprietary, they're obviously non-contributing anything back to you. And if they are copyleft license, they may become contributing forks. And now I'm gonna raise a very philosophical question, and I'm not giving any inclination of what the answer should be. It's purely rhetorical. But what would have happened if Postgres would be copyleft licensed?
I don't know. Actually, it's a good question, because we have good example Postgres, which is on very permissive license and has success compared to MySQL, which was on a GPL. But I don't think it's fully related to licensing. And we also have in operational systems, we have opposite example: Linux on GPL with huge success, and FreeBSD and other BSD systems on BSD licenses with limited success, I would say, right? So we have both examples here, right?
Yeah.
I've got something just before I think that's a really good question. I think it's worth discussing. Before though, you said about contributing even if they're proprietary. So yeah, just one point there, but I guess that goes straight onto the discussion as to what might have happened if Postgres was AGPL.
It's certainly true what you're saying. I just think the motivations are slightly different. So is the reason why Amazon is lately contributing a lot to Postgres motivated by this, the license, or it's because of their main purpose is to serve well their customers, and they realize that to do this, they need to also be good citizens and participate in the upstream project. I think it's more related to this. But for example, they're doing fantastic contributions, no question. But one thing that I would love to see open source is Aurora's backend infrastructure. I think it's a fantastic technology, and this is not open source at all. They're contributing to core Postgres, let's say, but they're not open sourcing their proprietary Aurora code. If Postgres would have been GPL or AGPL, it would be entitled to the source code. Different story is that whether Aurora may have existed or not under that scenario. So, because I'm not advocating for an answer to this question. I'm just
I would raise different part as well. Like it would be great if they open sourced UI and control plane to manage configuration, for example, and so on. Why not?
But there's also a counterexample.
UI and it,
yes.
I'm like it. I think it's maybe a very strange opinion, but it would be great if they open sourced it. I think they will never do it, right? Because this is this is layer.
They open source Bubblefish, and this is part of their key infrastructure, right? So it's all not black and white.
Right. Okay. Let's talk about actually like what
the second question, or you want to switch to something?
Yeah, the second question. We have dozens of good managed Postgres offerings already, even coming from Oracle, IBM, SAP. Which is crazy, right? But they do it, and from Deutsche Telekom, for example, and so on. So many of them use Kubernetes operators. Because it provides a lot of automation, it provides sometimes UI and so on, API. But like with this regard, if you build some Postgres project, like how should you approach the choice of license? Let's start actually. Let's maybe step back a little bit here, and why we should do open source at all. If we want business, if we want good product, we see opportunity. Many things are not excellent still. There are many opportunities. Why should you do open source at all today?
I think, Michael, that you need to start with this one.
Yeah. I can also maybe I can answer the opposite question. Why not open source? Like I feel like that almost is I guess it's the same question.
Inverted.
Yeah, well, why is PG Mustard not open source? And the short version of it is because we wanted it to be a business, and because we wanted the value to be the product. We didn't want value to be like the services around it or to charge for anything else. We wanted to charge for the IP. We wanted it to be really easy to use and not to need to give services on it. And the final point is, it's way easier to go in the opposite direction. Like I know we've seen famous examples going kind of less permissive over time, or open source to not open source according to strict definitions. But the version that you had on a permissive license is available forever for everybody. And a lot of when you're making a new product, quite often you whether we like it or not, 80% of the value is often in the first 20% of the work. You're giving away a lot if you do that. Mongo and Timescale and Elasticsearch, they're I can't remember the exact versions, but let's say they're Apache versions of those software are very good. Like they're fantastic. They do a lot. And yes, they've all improved their products a lot since then, and since they've gone to a different license. But all the cloud vendors can use those licenses still. So anyway, I think it's different for platforms versus products. PGMaster is very much, a point tool. It's not a platform that people are going to build on top of. It's, the value is in the UI, the value is in the algorithm, the scoring. If we open source those things, that's all the value. You've got everything that we provide, and we're no better at hosting that than anybody else. That's not the value. We're no better at servicing it than anybody else. So basically, the value in our product is the product. And I think if that's the case, the simplest business model is charge for the product. So that's where we've started. So that's why, not open source, right? Because if we gave that away, that's anybody could run it, and there's no need to pay us anything. So I really respect people that do that. But if your motivations are to have a business, you need to work out how to make money somehow. And if it's not the software, what is it going to be? Or if it's not the core of the software. So there's obviously multiple different models there. So yeah, that's the short version, I think, of why not open source. And I guess there's arguments that I've not covered there at all about contribution. Like a lot of the companies I mentioned were the main contributors to their project. Timescale are the main people behind Timescale. MongoDB were pretty much the only people develop. If you're going to be the main developers anyway, that's a good point. But if you're building a platform that you hope other people will start contributing towards, and you won't be the main developers of long term, I think there's a huge advantage to not just being open source, but being permissive, maybe. So, well, actually, that's a different discussion. But being open source for sure is helpful if you want lots of people contributing. I think that's where Postgres especially has really flourished and benefited. It's not, there are huge numbers of companies that have contributed to it over time and contributed significantly to the code base. And I don't think that we see that as much in these kind of not quite open source licensed companies.
Yeah, I think this is a truly fantastic answer.
Fantastic answer, right?
Yeah.
I wanted to add that it's not only about contribution. Sometimes, for example, if you're a serious company, you consider different tools, products, and so on. And if the code is open, it's very good in terms of documentation wise and security wise. You can audit how it works, how analyze for some additional risks and so on. And you can always answer how it works without documentation is always lacking something, right? And having source code in hand helps to understand and minimize various risks. So this is the reason for to use open source, actually, right? So who knows what's behind all those services which used open source but built additional layers of something.
My takeaway here is that your first decision should not be to open source and then think about the license. Should be, what is your business model? What do you want to do with this? And your answer may be, this is not going to be open source, it's going to be proprietary. And that's a perfectly valid answer, like in your case. I'm a huge open source advocate, but that doesn't mean everything needs to be open source, or open source is the solution for everything, or that everything should be open source. None of that. Make your decision first. Figure out your business model. And if open source fits your business model, then maybe you will succeed also as an open source product. And then think of the license that will fit that business model that you're trying to run on top of it. And if there's no answer for that, then be proprietary. There's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely fantastic software. There is proprietary, and there's nothing wrong with that. And actually, you mentioned MongoDB and Elastic, that they transitioned from open source. MongoDB was AGPL, and I believe Elastic was also, but I may be wrong on this one. And they transitioned to a proprietary license. I think this is not the right path, not the ideal path, because it looks
they
like
transitioned to some custom licenses pretending kind of open source at some extent, but I know you think they are not open source at all because those licenses are not OSI approved, open source initiative approved, right? So
they violate the freedom to run the project for any purpose. That's the main. I mean, they say if you're they actually distinguish between groups of people. If you look like this, if you have red ears, you cannot run the software. Well, they don't say this. They say if you're a code vendor, right? But they are restricting who can run the software for which purpose. And that's what violates this freedom to run the project, the software for anything you want.
So it's like source available, but not open source.
Yeah, exactly.
You can read it for the reason I mentioned. If you want to inspect how it's organized, you can do it,
Yeah, exactly.
but it's not open, not free, because it's violating this. Okay, makes sense.
So I can relate of our use case also, why we decided to open source Postgres. And the reason is that Postgres for us is two things. A is a complex piece of software. We're orchestrating Postgres with all the components that you need to run a production stack, hence the name, right? So we include high availability, connection pooling, monitoring, backups, web interface, extensions, you name it, like dozens of components tightly integrated and packaged. This is something for which we need a lot of feedback. We need a lot of users to test it. A lot of users are guiding our process. Not only the software is open, but also the process is open. All our issues are open. Anyone can go, and we're hosted on GitLab. Anyone can go there, create an issue, comment on a given issue. And we receive very frequent feedback from our users that is improving the software and guiding us. And this is something that we really wanted to have. On top of that, our business model is akin to the Red Hat model. And we are just offering services on top of this open source software, which is subscription support.
Exactly what Michael wanted to avoid in the very beginning.
Yeah,
right? So.
yeah, exactly. It's two very different products, right? They're targeted and doing very different things. And Postgres is kind of a very wide, far-reaching platform, which actually could also be a building block for other things. Whereas Michael's product is very focused on a particular topic and for a particular pretty also wide user base, because who doesn't want to optimize queries, right? But it's very directed product and very precise, right, on what you're doing. So I think it's two different use cases, and hopefully both our decisions are the good ones.
Yeah, we have some feedback in chat. First of all, sending thanks. Thank you for watching. And also since a lot of products now are cloud-based, being open source may not be a major consideration for customers when deciding what products they want to buy. So yeah, I agree with this. And actually, this like, if you go to RDS and then raise a question in some community resources, community places, asking, okay, I have RDS Postgres or Aurora Postgres especially, and I have this behavior, you often get response, it's not Postgres, right? So yeah, so we have so many Postgres flavors, and permissive license allowed it, but you think if it was on GPL, it also would be possible, right? Why not? Because RDS, MySQL also exists.
Yes.
Do you know any AGPL examples of SaaS
databases? Yes.
Not necessarily, but yeah, well, you mentioned Mongo actually and Elastic. Of course, it was example already. Both of them are your examples, right? So yeah, well, but okay. Do we see any trends? What to expect from future with regard of open source versus not open source, GPL versus permissive license, AGPL versus permissive licenses? And in the context of how cloud consumption and models are changing. Well, by the way, I wanted to say also, I think that clouds are different. There are several layers of them. And first layer is when AWS started with they offer VMs and resources. It's a perfect thing because I hate dealing with acquiring hardware, spending months waiting when it's arrived, and then go to data center, it's nightmare. This to be solved and billing with seconds precision of billing, it's absolutely fantastic thing, right? But this is the first layer of clouds. Second layer of clouds, when they take some open source and build on top of it good UI and good automation, this already I doubt will be for all. People want choices here, and we see choices, we have many choices. So what trends can we observe and maybe some kind of predict for nearest 5-10 years in terms of databases, Postgres ecosystem specifically, in terms of licenses and business models here?
If I may jump in, this is a topic I'm really interested personally. I'm seeing a trend that actually it's being given a name called repatriation. We all know that technology world is kind of a pendulum, right? And it goes back and forth over time. And there's been a really huge push to the cloud in the last decade or less than a decade. And there's starting to be a little bit of a pushback because of some of the reasons that you mentioned: control over your infrastructure, more flexibility, and more owning your own infrastructure. But on the other hand, and also reducing cost factors. And so, for example, we've seen lately the case of 37 Signals and their huge repatriation from the cloud, for example, and previously, some years ago, Dropbox, for example. But as of today, this is becoming more of a trend. There's almost daily news about thoughts about repatriation and self-hosting again. But in reality, nobody wants to go self-hosting the way we did it 10 years ago, right? Like provisioning your own hardware, or even if you're running on VMs, setting a Postgres stack on a VM with all the production components and automation to do that, because you don't want to SSH and start apt-get install, right? That takes even weeks for a seasoned Postgres DBA if you do it well. And so I believe nobody wants to go back to that. But on the other hand, you kind of want to run some workloads on-prem or your own VM provided by a cloud vendor, but not on top of a provided service. And I think this is going to become a trend precisely because of what you said. It's becoming an option. And I would say that Kubernetes in particular may play a key role here because of two main reasons. One of them is that the level of automation that you can achieve with Kubernetes is nowhere seen, in my opinion. Just talking about things that we've done in Postgres, only thanks to Kubernetes API, we have even been able to not automate minor version upgrades and major version upgrades and control restore for cluster, which is something obviously table stakes of today. We haven't even automated running manual but automated vacuums or repacks to remove bloat or even benchmarks, fully automated. So you can, and this is just the beginning. You can really automate operations on Kubernetes, and then it gives you environment independence. You can run on Amazon or Google or Azure or on-prem or anywhere that you want on your laptop with barely zero or.
But you need, you have two cases here, sub-cases. One is when your provider provides you some managed Kubernetes service and you don't need to manage it yourself, Kubernetes itself. Or versus it doesn't do it. For example, you go to some low-cost provider like OVH or Hetzner, for example, and if they don't provide Kubernetes, managed Kubernetes service, you need to manage Kubernetes additionally, and this can be a headache, right?
I think managed Kubernetes services are a bargain. They're really cheap. They're charging like $70 per month for the control plane, which is highly available on itself, and it takes resources to run. And they are very, very well tested, fine-tuned, optimized, secure.
What if they're not available in where I'm going to host my?
Well, then, yeah, you need to self-host Kubernetes. You can choose one of the easiest, maybe, distributions for that, K3S, for example. Yeah, I mean, you're going a little bit the harder way, but still fun.
But still, the point still remains valid, right? So Kubernetes might have some competition with cloud itself, or big clouds, at least like big three clouds, right? For those who want to save budgets a lot. Because
and just to give you an example, I frequently use K3S on my laptop to test the stackers and all the things on Kubernetes, and it's just a one-line command to install it. It's a curl URL pipe bash blah blah blah. Yes, I already vetted the script and it's safe to run. And in 30 seconds, literally with a good internet connection, you have a Kubernetes cluster running on your laptop.
Right, but it's not production. If something happens,
it's not production.
Load it, like
But you can take it from there to production.
Question in chat about this repatriation. Do you see already some examples, or it's just some talks starting?
There's plenty. 37 Signals is the most significant latest one. And many years ago, Dropbox, they claim like many millions of in savings. But there was also another one a couple of weeks ago announced that they were claiming also like many millions of, I don't remember their name, of savings in the repatriation. There's also a very nice, interesting.
I can before sorry for
Go
interrupting.
ahead, please.
I can add here. I'm going probably to explore this path myself. I'm just very curious how we can switch between clouds easily and so on. And for like some smaller projects, I'm going to try it, because when I built my previous companies, I used low cost providers a lot. Then started to use, of course, AWS, GCP a lot, and so on. But now I see the price difference is so huge, and with Kubernetes, indeed, we can try to migrate between them and avoid vendor lock-in, unless you use some these higher level services. Amazon has plenty of them, and others also. If you don't use and if you don't rely on those services, if you need only VMs, disks, object storage, you can go anywhere, right? With Kubernetes, probably.
Mm.
So this. I like this idea. I don't like Kubernetes, honestly, but I like the idea of freedom, and this one of freedoms I would like to explore myself. So you can like to answer a question in chat. I'm really seriously consider to try for some things on my own right now, and I think we will see more soon. So sorry for interruption. You wanted to add something?
I just wanted to mention there's a blog post that is thought-provoking. It's from Andreessen Horowitz, one of the main venture capitals in the world. They call this the trillion dollar paradox, something like this. I don't remember exactly. And it's basically an estimation of how much amount of valuation for companies could be saved or could be raised if they would stop using these higher level cloud services. And the numbers are staggering. I don't know if they're correct or not, but it makes you think about it. Basically mentions that some of the top 500 companies in the world, according to their numbers on internal queries, that the cost of doing business, that means, what you need to produce an output of $1, is 92 cents on cloud for some cases.
Well, we can do our own math always. You just take the prices, consider all discounts and so on, and can do it. I posted the link you mentioned in the chat. Also, we'll add it to our description of video. So if you watch recorded, you can see it below. Yeah. So this is very interesting. Okay. Any last words you want to add on this topic?
I just had a quick one on, so I see it quite differently for small to medium-sized businesses. I think for large businesses, that makes a lot of sense, but the smaller to medium-sized companies that I deal with, they're almost exclusively on these managed services.
I could argue on this because I was a small company several times in the past, and it was successful for me. If you know how to manage things and you have good automation, you can save a lot just switching to cheaper providers. And if I'm not talking about buying hardware and so on. You can have either cheaper cloud with VMs or rented hardware, and then you can start from there and so on, and they will replace disks and so on if needed, like all hardware failure and so on. It's also a valid model, but of course cloud with all APIs is more it's better in terms of automation and so on, right? But you can say, well,
I think you're right. I was just saying that what I'm seeing people choosing and why, and I think the choices people are making is different in those two groups. The other final point is I think there's like a developer experience question here. I think developers are getting more and more power in organizations, in technical teams and in the companies in general. And the license does play into that a little bit. Like if they're scared or if they have to talk to lawyers versus if they don't, there's like a developer experience part of that. And I think there's a marketing angle. I think there's I think one of the best at this at the moment, Superbase, they're using open source as it's part of their main value proposition. The freedom to go self-host it, to move away from them. There's like a marketing angle too that's really interesting, and I can see that working for other companies in the next few years as well. But they've been great at it, so I'm not sure how easy it is to copy.
But usually, control plane is not open source somehow, and cloud automation, and this is strange to me. Why?
I think you know why.
Yeah, I know. Of course. Okay. Thank you everyone for watching this. Those who watch online, don't go away. We will have hacking session in a few minutes with Andrei and Kirk. Also tomorrow we will publish our new episode of Postgres FM podcast. It will be about PG star statements. Quite infamous extension. Well, famous. Sorry, popular. I said
popular for sure.
Both.
Yeah, we will discuss pros and cons and everything. So yeah, and thank you very much, Alvaro, for joining today. It was super interesting. I still I understand many things, but still have many questions. But it's my own questions. Thank you, guys.
You know, you can pick me. All right, thank you very much for having me.